Welcome back to Social 30, ladies and gentlemen. Today we're looking at Lesson 16, Introduction to Democracy. In this unit, we'll be studying Chapter 10 and 11 of the textbook, and then when we look at citizenship, we'll move into Chapters 13 and 14. In terms of the year, if we want to divide the year into 100% of content, democracy would be about 20% of the year. So capitalism is about 20% of the year, democracy is about 20% of the year, and then that chapter 5, that's a little bit more than 20%, because in that chapter we're looking at both politics and economics from a non-liberal perspective. And then we add in some Cold War contemporary world at the end, and there's our course. So what are we doing today in the introduction? Well, at the beginning of our unit on authoritarianism, we tried to understand why somebody might support authoritarianism. And one of the key things was authoritarianism is decisive. So why might somebody support democracy? Well, democracy isn't about decisiveness. They might actually own that and say, why should you be pro-liberalism politically? Well, we're not about decisiveness. We're about consideration. We're not about efficiency. The glory of democracy isn't to be efficient. Efficiency doesn't mean that we listen to everyone. It's inefficient to listen to all stakeholders, to listen to all shareholders, to address all portions of your community and your population. That's very inefficient. It's easier to dictate. But the people that are pro-liberalism politically, they're like, the inefficiency of democracy is the glory of democracy, because there's more inclusion. The lack of decisiveness of democracy is the glory of democracy, because we don't make rash decisions, because we consult the community. There's more consensus building, more grassroots consulting. Efficiency is not the highest example of human intelligence. It is not an important quality in society. It is a minor shop floor necessity. So you want, a factory to be efficient. Here in town we have the distribution center. We want that to be efficient. That doesn't mean government has to be efficient. It needs to be considerate. It needs to consult all stakeholders. So you don't build a society on efficiency is a bold claim. You build society on consideration and on inefficiency. It is a great quality. It is a great force. But the anti-democratic forces have always reduced society to utility, to function. The society must be serving a certain function. Well, what if the main function of society is that we should be heard? Functional societies are self-destructive. If all you want is utility, if all you want is efficiency, efficiency will lead to self-destruction. After all, what they are promising is efficiency in delivery. They are self-destructive because their view of human intelligence is so narrow. Case in point, Stalin. His view of human intelligence was so narrow that the Stalinist system that he created led to the death of the Soviet Union. What was Glasnost? It was trying to expand human intelligence in the Soviet Union. Glasnost was Gorbachev understanding that human intelligence was too narrow in the Soviet Union. As a legacy of Stalin, the authoritarian state was very efficient, but it wasn't ideal. Because it had muted, the majority of the people. So there's a narrowness and an immediateness that authoritarian states have. And narrowness might seem attractive in times of crisis. We need to narrow, the discussion, the debate, so that we can have a quick, a sudden, and efficient response, because the barbarians are at the gates. But long term, society can't be built on efficiency. There's more glory to be had by listening to all. So that's a key argument by John Ralston Saul that I think that you can refer to him in your essays when you talk about the conflict between political liberalism and non-liberalism. To what extent should we have efficiency? Well, he's arguing that efficiency shouldn't be our goal. It's a great quote, and that's why I have it in red here. Now here's another idea that kind of challenges Saul a little bit. This quote comes from a diploma exam source from an A1, and some of you have probably been working on this source. In democratic states, it is relatively easy to do what Saul wants us to do, right? To afford every person his full array of civil liberties when times are good. Troubles are few, and stability is the order of the day. Most democratic states have constitutional laws obliging the states to ensure the protection of liberties. The situation gets much more difficult, though, when you have truckers honking their horns in Ottawa. We're upset. We're honking our horns. We're not going to go away. We must be heard. Things get more difficult when the FLQ kidnap a Canadian politician and a British diplomat. Things get more difficult when terrorists attack New York. Things get more difficult when you're at a state of war. Or when there's a pandemic, when there's a health crisis. So the situation gets more difficult, however, when conditions are no longer ideal. So democracy works under ideal circumstances, is what is being stated here, but under less than ideal circumstances, even democratically chosen governments must have the ability to become more authoritarian. And we've witnessed that in Canada this semester, that there's legislation that the government can turn to in times of crisis, so that they can have more extraordinary power to deal with the crisis and then return liberty back to the people. During these times of crisis, democratic states face the potential of a divisive public debate. Should we not, pass anti-terrorist legislation or invoke the War Measures Act? Should we or should we not, declare martial law? Or should we or should we not create the USA Patriot Act? It is in situations of crisis that authoritarian states display their great advantage. So in an essay, and you're going to be writing at least one essay on politics, right? In an essay, you can see how you have a 3-paragraph kind of thing. This is when democracy works. Democracy is great because of this, although this, but we need this, therefore this. Although democracy works under these conditions we might need authoritarianism. You might also add, this is why authoritarianism isn't ideal all the time. This is why democracy is not ideal all the time. So even though democracy has some strengths, it also has weaknesses. Even though authoritarianism has strengths, it also has weaknesses. Here's my hybrid. So it might become more of a 5-paragraph body. So that's what you need to begin to collect here, is your arguments and evidence. This is a new unit now, right? A new unit on democracy. Collect those arguments and evidence that you can build an essay around in the future. You could see a source like this on an A1 that is showing that some people would look at this source and say, man, that's a healthy democracy because the people have the right to protest, to petition the government and saying this is a flaw that we want to be addressed. Others might say they look at that and instead of seeing a healthy democracy, they see division, that they see a lack of unity, that the greatness of the Soviet Union and Nazi Germany that they did achieve, they achieved under unity. And maybe that's why Canada hasn't achieved greatness. It's because we allow for this kind of lack of consensus to be expressed. Alfred E. Smith has a nice short quote. So maybe you're like, man, I want to include some quotes in my essays, but I can't memorize John Stahl. That's way too long of a quote to memorize. You could paraphrase him. You don't need to memorize all of that. But this is a quote that you could memorize. All the ills of democracy can be cured by more democracy. So I'm not sure I know what that means yet on day 1 of this unit. We'll check back at the end of the unit and see if we understand what it means. This one is also quite insightful. Democracy alone, of all forms of government, enlists the full force of men's enlightened will. If I'm writing an essay defending democracy, that's a short quote that is clear and I think, pretty insightful. You know, why do we want a democracy more than authoritarianism? You know, authoritarianism, we can be led by the elite. Well, if your argument is that there's more intelligence in the hands of Hitler and his advisors than 50 million German people, that's a pretty weak argument. You know, you're enlisting the full force of men's enlightened will. That's what makes democracy stronger. And I think that goes back to John Saul's point about this narrowness, right? That efficiency is not our goal. That what we'll see with an efficient government is a narrowness. In that immediance of governing, that you're going to be narrowing your pool of answers and solutions that you can turn to. We have some tough questions in the 21st century to tackle. Hopefully we don't have a narrow group of people that we consult. Because if we do, we might not find the answers needed to continue our shared story. So what I'm going to get you to do now, I'm going to get you to go through this document and look for some of the foundations of democracy. Go back and think about John Locke. Think about Machiavelli. Read through some of these quotes. There's some questions attached to them, these things in color. These are more of questions if you're working from home that you'd be working on. Because last time I taught Social 30, we were sent home. At this time last year. So we're not going to do those. But you can read through them, read through these quotes about liberalism and anarchism and other things. And I'm going to interrupt you in probably about 15 minutes because it shouldn't take you that long to read through it. And when I interrupt you, I'm going to talk to you about the media.